maybe not a question, but more of an observation. There's been a lot of talk about a referendum, and I think that's an exceptional idea, except that I think here in Florida we are in the Pleistocene, and our legislature is all Neanderthals. And I've been working with the Amendment 4 referendum, and the business lobby is prepared to spend $1 gazillion to try to defeat that. And I'm not so sure that the same thing wouldn't happen on a renewable energy standard. I mean, all that would have to happen is the Tea Partyists and the faux news people, figure out some reason why it's not a good idea, and we would be toast and spend a whole lot of money and get nowhere.
Yeah, well, what I would say, and I've always said, is that there's more of us than them. We just got to get organized. I mean, that's really it. And the problem is there's so many different renewable energy kind of policies and ideas out there, and then what happens is that we go to the legislature and everybody's coming there with these 10 or 20 ideas, and it's confusing to those guys, So we got the numbers, but we just got to decide on what it is we want to aim at.
Hi, this is Melissa Baldwin. I'm with the Florida Conservation Alliance Institute, and we work on federal climate and energy policy. I have two questions. The first question is, what do you think is the best policy, both on the state and the federal level, that we can take to increase distributed generation?
I'll take a shot at that. The one thing you need to do to increase distributed generation is you need to have certainty and you need to have transparency. And that's actually been one of the criticisms of a renewable portfolio standard in the past, is that only the big players can play. There's really kind of what they call high transaction costs, which means you need a team of lawyers to negotiate these contracts, and that tends to dissuade smaller developers from participating. And additionally, contract negotiation, it's a very sort of resource-intensive process. If you have, like I talked about earlier in my presentation, sort of open contracts that anyone can take advantage of if they meet certain criteria, like a standard offer contract or even a component within perhaps a carve-out for distributed generation. I think the way you implement that is you offer standard offer contracts to folks, or you incorporate a feed-in tariff for smaller generators, maybe 20 megawatts or less. In fact, the California Public Utilities Commission is trying to incorporate feed-in tariffs for smaller systems of 20 megawatts and under. They're having proceedings on that right now because these smaller systems just simply aren't getting built with these RPSs. So that's certainly one way to go about it.
My Florida Energy Commission had a recommendation that dealt with it directly. In Florida, a person or a company cannot set up a generating unit and sell energy to anybody in any other utilities district without being considered a utility, and regulated by the PSC. And so once you set up business in somebody else's territory, you're going to have that issue. So, and we know all the IOUs especially, oppose that. So our recommendation was to limit it at 5 megawatts because we thought maybe that, might be bite-sized. But if you do that, then you take away a barrier. It's not necessary. One of the things that government needs to do is not just incentivize, it's to remove barriers. That's a barrier. We need to remove that barrier. And the legislation in 2008 took some steps. We do net metering. Even the munis and the co-ops do net metering. That's one step, okay? But that still doesn't go as far as allowing an entity to come in, okay? I'm ABC company. I come into your place of business. I set up some kind of renewable generation operation. I sell you my power, and then I sell back what you don't need, on the grid or to somebody else. That's one way you get distributed generation. And in distributed generation, once again, remember, you don't have to transmit it. You hear all this wind energy talk, nationally, with all these wind tunnels coming up the middle of the country. Well, the problem with that is you got to transmit it all the way, to the centers where you need it. This is one of the problems that California's having now, okay? Because they've got a lot of the solar power they buy, the solar concentrating power that they buy, is from Arizona. You got to transmit it in. Transmission is very expensive. okay? It takes a long time. It's very expensive. You have some losses. We need to encourage all the distributed generation we can.
That sounds like a common sense policy to me. Are there any lawmakers who are championing that idea? Or is it in a bill? Has it been proposed?
None that I know of.
Why not?
I don't think anybody wants to take that on. You know, that's what I don't think. I mean, we're having problems right now when, you know, getting champions for renewable energy. That's just another rock in somebody's pack, you know, to try to carry. So I just don't see any will. I think we've got to take other steps before we get. It is common sense, and I agree with you. Okay, now on the other hand, and one reason why you might want to keep it small is what the IOUs say. Look, we spend a lot of money. We're obligated. We have a statutory duty. We have a mandate to serve. Okay, so I mean, if you're in our territory, we've got to serve you. That means we've got to have the grid there and everything else. So we have to consider the whole picture. So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But there's a lot of room. George mentioned, you know, now we've got that competition between the producer, you know, and the user. We didn't have back 80 years ago when we started this system, you know. But there are ways to work through it, okay? And that's one of the ways we can work through it.
And I want to add a couple of other ideas to the mix. One of the things that happened this year that has slightly disrupted our progress is a change in legislation regarding property taxes and tangible taxes for solar. So it originally had an exemption, and now that's being reconsidered, sort of pulled back and pulled off the table. So that adds to the cost of installing a system over the life of the system, not just in the first year. So that right there is a barrier that we had overcome previously and is now back on the table. And then the other thing I would want to mention is permitting requirements. They are all over the board in the state of Florida, and you know, we are trying to work with our code officials and you know, local inspectors in our service territory. And just in our service territory, we deal with 4 code jurisdictions, and none of them do it the same. And they want to learn, and they are willing to learn. But at the state level, if we were to try to standardize solar permitting, I think there would be a huge benefit to both the utilities trying to implement these programs and the customers trying to participate.
I have one more question, and that is, it has to do with federal energy and climate policy. And I think one of you mentioned the idea of putting a price on carbon. What are the benefits of having a price on carbon in terms of having more certainty in the marketplace, and how would that affect Florida's ability to draw more clean energy businesses to our state and to our country?
I think it's a good idea, but politically it's difficult because, well, I'm sure you hear the rhetoric, cap and tax, and and all that. I think that citizens are going to have to show politicians how much they value clean air, lower emissions, and until that happens, I guess the two parties, we only have a two-party system for the most part. They're going to use this as a kind of a political football, and it's going to be a way to either get elected or get defeated, and that's what's happening now. But again, we've got to get engaged and let them know that we care about it.
Thanks, and I just wanted to add to that, because we really didn't go to the subject of capping CO2 emissions. People respond to price signals. I have found, that they don't respond really to anything else except price signals. That's it. They don't respond to legacy arguments. They don't respond to saving the planet. They respond to price signals. And to suggest that this is some sort of tax, call it what you will, but as a society, we always put a price on things that are not good for the greater community. Alcohol, cigarettes, you name it. To some extent, we regulate those activities, and we ought to be doing the same with CO2 emissions. especially living in Florida, we have 1,200 miles of coastline. We're on the front lines of climate change, and certainly as a state and as a nation, we need to lead in that effort to reduce CO2 emissions. It's not going to be easy, but I think the countries that step out in front of it will be the ones that do better in the long time, over the long haul in the world marketplace. So I think they can all work together. I think energy efficiency, I think an RPS, and I think some sort of regulation on carbon. It's really a three-legged stool, because also cap on carbon also goes beyond the electricity industry. It goes, if it goes to the greater economy as a whole, then we start to be more competitive on other industries as well.
I just want to add another comment here, is that we're stuck in this sort of situation. We've heard taxes are bad words. The future, a future we want, requires an investment. Otherwise, you end up with a future of which you've made no investments, and you'll get what you get. Okay, so the question is, are we willing to invest in the future and come together collectively to determine what that future should be? And it's difficult because right now nobody wants to spend money. So I think we're going to be in a stalemate of not coming up with the future that we want. So I think individually we have to make it known that we want a clean, sustainable future, and that we're willing to make an investment, albeit not a real expensive one, but more than a penny a month. Okay, and the poll that came out, by the way, that was passed, it had an 83% approval of this, was $1 a month of an investment. That's the poll that came out 3 years ago. It said $1 a month. Okay, you notice on the public benefit fund numbers that I had put up there, California is typically on the $2 a month, and I tried to explain to you that their electric bills total a month is about half of what we pay. So we're looking at the noise. The rebate you got was $4 a month because the price of fossil fuels went down. All right, so I think the citizens are willing to do it. We just have to collectively realize it's an investment in the future, and there's a lot to be said for the jobs that come out of all this, whether it be cap and trade or renewables or efficiencies, which are the lowest cost things to go do. There's a lot of employment to be done, and I'd rather have that employment be my neighbor next door rather than somebody outside the state.